Hello, good morning, everyone. Good morning to you all. So, yes, good morning, Alfez, Mohammed, Usman, and Raj. So, in this regular session, this is our regular session in which we are going to understand the compliance of the lungs. Compliance of the lungs. So, let's understand first what is the term compliance. So at once, in very simple term, if I have to tell what is compliance, compliance means the, this is a general term I'm talking, just the terminology. What is the meaning of the terminology? It means the capacity to distend under pressure. Okay. Now, say for example, we'll take the example of a spring, just a common example. Then we'll correlate it to the lungs. Okay, say this is a spring, just a normal regular spring. So in this spring, what I do now, I just put a weight. I hang a weight. So as soon as I hang a weight, what will happen to the spring? What will happen? The spring will go down. The spring will distend, right? Now, the stretching, the stretching capacity of this string, when a weight is hung, is called the compliance. Means anything when pressure is exerted, if it can stretch, if it can distend, that is compliance. Now, how does it correlate to the lungs? Because this is respiratory system, right? We are talking about lungs. And other than that also, this compliance we have understood in terms of the blood vessel and heart also in our previous regular lecture. Now, say we are drawing, this is our, like I'm just drawing the left lungs. Okay. So this is the lungs. When I'm breathing in, when there is inspiration, that is flow of air, that is during inspiration. During inspiration, that when I'm breathing in, air is coming from the atmosphere to inside my lungs. Now, when this is happening, what will happen? My lungs will now stretch out, will become, I'm just drawing it little bigger. So it will now increase in the diameter. This is increase in diameter. The reasons and all, the theory formula, the theory principle, how the muscles are acting, that and all we know. But ultimately what is happening? When the air is coming, the pressure is from the air within the lungs. What is happening? The lungs is inflating. It is stretching. That stretching capacity, that stretching of lungs is called is called compliance. Okay, this is called compliance, only compliance. Now, the thing is that this compliance and elasticity, they go hand in hand. So, what is elasticity? They go hand in hand, but not directly, inversely. That also we will come. Before that, let's understand what is elasticity. So let's go back to this same example. So now again here, what have I seen? I have seen that this hook, this spring, when I have hung a weight, when I have hung a Wait, what did it manifest? It manifested compliance. Means it manifested stretchability, right? Okay. Now, this stretchability, it does not it does not last forever. Now, this is just a basic example. Now, when I remove, when this load is removed, that weight is removed, then what happened? Then this same spring come back to its normal condition, come back to its normal tightness, means it is elastic. So, stretchability is the distension, is the compliance. Capacity to come back to its original state, to its tight state, is called the elasticity. So, elasticity is the stiffness. Now, coming to the lung, say for example, this pen with which I am writing, if you stretch also, nothing will happen because it does not have any compliance. The compliance is zero here, but it is able to maintain its stiffness, its tightness. That means its elasticity is high. Its elasticity is high and compliance is zero. Compliance is zero. Now coming to the same concept, yes, Usman, this is what I'm telling, right? That's what I'm telling. The totally these things are totally opposite meaning. You please listen, you will understand. So compliance, I repeat for you, you listen and understand, Usman. So compliance means stretching, distensibility when there is a pressure, like when air entered the lung, it has expanded. This is the compliance, right? Now, during expiration, right? During expiration, like in expiration, what happens? The lung that has distended. The lungs that has distended, once there is expiration, it will come back to its normal position. The capacity of the lungs to come back to its normal position, not more than normal position or not less than normal position, this is the elasticity. This is the elasticity. Understood? Is it clear? So this is the elasticity. Now, this compliance, this compliance is inversely related to elasticity. Okay, this is the point to remember. Now, for elasticity to happen, elasticity happens, we are talking here about the lungs because we are talking about the respiratory system, happens in lungs due to presence of elastin, okay, or the protein name is elastin, tin. So that is the protein and the virtue is the elastins. Okay, so elastin, this is the name of the protein which we have to remember. So the lungs has compliance distance when air is coming, and it also goes back to the normal because of the elasticity. This is a very too important concept because lots of clinical conditions are related to this concept. Okay. Now coming to the factors that is affecting factors affecting the compliance. So, factors affecting the compliance or the stretchability are, what affects the compliance or stretchability are: number one, elasticity. So, if elasticity is more, then compliance will be less. Now, what do I mean by that? Say, due to some reason, this is the, say, normal lungs in normal condition, okay, under pressure, means air has come, the lung has inflated to this, okay, that is under pressure. Again, after withdrawal of pressure, means during expiration, right? So, the lungs should come back to its normal position like this. Instead, maybe due to some reason, the elasticity becomes more and the lungs comes back more than its normal condition, more than its normal condition. That means the that means the compliance has become less. Whenever there is increase in the elasticity, then the compliance becomes less. Okay. So here, more elasticity and decrease in the compliance. In certain clinical condition, it happens. We will understand gradually. Okay, this is the compliance concept. Now, there is a formula to measure this compliance. Formula to measure compliance of lungs. What is the formula to measure the compliance of lung? The formula is change in the volume, like how much volume has been expanded, has been stretched within the lungs under the influence of pressure. So, this volume is volume. In ml, it can be measured like this much ml of air has come, air. Lungs inflate only when there is air. That also we will see the proof. And how much, under how much pressure it has inflated. So, yesterday what did we study? Pressure that is acting on the lung. It is not only one pressure. It is not only one pressure. So, the pressure that determines how much the lung will inflate. What is the determinant factor? The determinant pressure, that is the transpulmonary pressure. What is transpulmonary pressure? It is the difference between the intra-alveoli pressure and the intra-pleural pressure. So, difference of this two is the transpulmonary pressure. So, compliance is measured by the change in the volume, by the difference in the alveoli pressure and the pleural pressure, means intraalveolar pressure and the pleural pressure. This is how the compliance is measured. Now, coming to the types of the compliance. This one we will understand with the example of a graph. Just before that, few are the important things. Okay, let's finish the applied part of it. Now, how does this compliance, applied part of compliance, how does compliance actually helps? Okay, now we know that. What do we know? Both the lungs and chest wall are distensible. That means what? When we are breathing in, air is coming from the atmosphere to inside the lungs. The lung is also expanding, the chest wall, the thorax is also expanding. Why? Because lung is not lying detached from the thorax. It is attached to the chest wall, right? So, when the lung is expanding, the chest wall is also expanding. The lung is deflating, the chest wall is also deflating. What is the reason for that? As we mentioned in the first class, the reason is that when there is deflation of the lungs, what did we study? The lung has a tendency to tear off, to come out of the thorax. But the thorax does not allow it to happen. So there is this pulling of the lungs by the thorax. Okay. So lungs volume increases, thorax volume increases. Lung volume decreases, thorax volume also decreases. This is the scenario. So both are having compliance, both are having elasticity. So when this compliance of lungs is studied separately, compliance of lungs alone, like in an experiment when the lungs have been cut out from the thorax and its inflation by applying air, by exerting air as a pressure is studied, it is about 0.2 centimeter of water. That is the scale change. And the compliance of the chest wall alone. Like if the chest wall is without the lungs, say the lung is cut out and left, and in the experimental animal, the chest wall is like externally exerted with pressure, because chest wall also has this elastic fiber elasticity and it is capable of undergoing compliance. So that also has a value of 0.2 centimeter per column of water. That is the compliance. But together, but together, lungs and the chest wall, like within our body, when the lung is attached to the chest wall, which is a normal condition, the compliance, it is half, like 0.1 centimeter of water. Like it is, this is the change in the, like, pressure. It is not measured in mmHg. It is measured in centimeter per water. It's like the column, the unit that we use. So that means what? When the lungs and the chest wall are physically attached, which is a natural condition in human body, the compliance is less. Means the stretchability, the distancing capacity of the lung and chest wall are less when they are together. This is a take of it. Okay, this is a take from it. Okay. Now, how is this useful? This usefulness, first theoretically we'll understand, then we will go to the graph. What is its useful? It's this use. So, this maintains this maintains the functional residual capacity. Functional residual capacity of the lung. When we do the lung volumes and capacities, we will go into it in details. For now, just remember what is functional residual capacity. Now, this is the volume of the air that is remained in the lung and is more than the residual volume. Okay, like after normal breathing in and breathing out, not while exerting pressure, in quiet breathing, like normally inspiration, normal expiration, which we don't even feel that we are breathing. In that one, after expiration, the amount of the air that is staying in the lung is the functional residual capacity. I repeat, I'm not writing it because next class again we will discuss this one in details. So functional residual capacity, it is the air remained in the lungs after tidal volume, after normal breathing in and breathing out. Okay. Now this one is maintained by the property of compliance. So how is it? Let's see. Had there been no compliance, then this would have been a very difficult situation to happen in human lungs. So I think this is clear. The graph, so I'm just zooming it in. Okay. So as we can see, this circle over here, this is the functional residual capacity. This is the functional residual capacity. The functional residual capacity, this is the amount of the air that remains in the lungs after normal breathing. So here you see the PW. This PW, it is actually the change in the compliance. So on your y-axis, you can see the lung volume. The lung volume. On your x-axis, this is the transmural pressure. The change across the walls of the airway. So here you see when the chest wall is alone, as I told you, is alone, made to expand, you get a steep curve, right? The values are different. It's single. You see it has expanded. This is the normal one. Below you see the blue curve. This is like the PTR. This is okay, before that one, let's talk of this one. The PL. The PL, the blue one, this is the steep curve, which means the compliance of the lung alone. That is why it is written PL. PL means the compliance of the lung just under the pressure. But when these two are combined together, like the chest wall and the lung, and then there is compliance, you see, you get a curve which is like this curve, which is like initially it is steeper and then it rises and goes like all the way, cutting through the both curve. So this is actually the one that I have highlighted it with the red line. So this is actually the graph that signifies the compliance of the lungs within the chest wall, and its importance lies in the fact that this one, it maintains this circle. It maintains this circle, which is the functional residual capacity. Because you see in the other two curves, may it be this PW, that compliance of the thoracic cavity or the chest one alone, or compliance of the lungs alone. None of this curve is actually maintaining alone. When they are alone, they are maintaining the functional residual volume or functional residual capacity. None of them are maintaining. Only when there is compliance of these two together, means lungs attached to the chest wall, only then functional residual capacity is maintained. Now, if you ask me, what is the physiological importance of it? The physiological importance of it is that at any given time, there should be some air in the lungs, otherwise the lungs will collapse. And it is because of the compliance of the lungs and the thoracic wall together, this functional residual capacity is maintained. Okay. Now coming to the types of the compliance. Coming to the types of compliance. Now compliance, that is the inflation and deflation of the lungs. It can be studied in three different ways. Okay. Number one is the static compliance. What is static compliance? Just as the name goes, static compliance. It is studying the compliance without taking the inspiratory and expiratory phase separately. Okay, at once together, taking this inspiration and expiration without taking it separately, when the stretching of the lungs is calculated, it is called a static compliance. So when we study the static compliance, we get a graph like this, because it is not taking the inspiration and expiration separately. So on your x-axis, as usual, you have the change in the volume, and here you have the pressure scale. So the graph that we get, which is normal, is something like this. Only one graph we get, because inspiration and expiration stages are not taken into account separately. Okay, whereas if we take this study, the stretchability separately during inspiration and expiration, it becomes dynamic compliance. Okay, it becomes dynamic compliance. So dynamic compliance, we can write it is the compliance. Compliance means stretchability, distensibility, whatever. Compliance of the lungs taking the phases, means taking means studying the phases of respiration separately. Like what happens, how much the lung is stretched out or inflated during inspiration and how much during the expiration. So since we are taking these two phases separately, here the curve will be something like this, because two phases are there. So we will get one like this and another like this. Okay, so here again, this is the pressure scale and this is the volume scale. So top, the one above, is actually this compliance that we get during expiration of our expiration, and here this is inspiration. Okay, now how much the lung has expanded during inspiration, as you can see, during inspiration is different from how much it expanded during the expiration, right? In case of a dynamic compliance, I repeat, look at the graph. I'll show you the graph also as a print. So here you see the compliance, the distension of the lungs during inspiration is different that of during expiration. That's why you get a, this kind of a structure. Now there is an area between these two. This area, this difference in the slope or the curve, this is what is called as, what is called as hysteresis. Now hysteresis is what actually gives us the idea if there is any kind of blockage or any kind of obstruction when the person is breathing in or breathing out. Okay, so now with the graph, first we will understand the hysteresis and then we will correlate the clinical condition related to the static compliance. So first, understanding the hysteresis. So the work done, the calculation for hysteresis is again by delta V by delta P, and the graph is like this. Okay, it is something like this. Hope you can see. Yeah, you can see, right? Okay. So as I told you, this is like this hysteresis, you get this kind of a graph. Okay, you get this kind of a image in which up you see is the expiration and down you see is the inspiration. Okay. Now, if you look at it, if you look at the graph, what do you see? The This is something to remember and understand. Usually, it it appears to us, okay, the distensibility, the stretchability, the distensibility or the stretchability of the lung must be greater during inspiration. And since the deflation or deflation or during expiration, the lung is coming back to its position. So the compliance, I'm not talking about elasticity here, I'm talking about compliance. So the compliance is less during expansion and less during deflation and more during expansion. Means compliance we may think is more during inspiration and less during expiration. But after the examination, after the study, what do you see? If you see here, the increase in the volume, follow the dotted lines. There is a steep rise in the pressure during expiration, right? The rise in the volume is much steeper and larger under pressure. But under the same pressure, the increase or the distensibility during inspiration is less. So graph, from this graph, what do we understand? That it is during expiration or deflation of lungs that compliance is more. This is a high yield point for us to remember. So it is during the expiration that the compliance is more. That means the stretching is more. That means when we are expiring, breathing out, the tension generated, the tension generated is more, is more. And what do we know compared to what it is generated during the expiration and inspiration? So what do we know? Compliance, just a quick remembrance, compliance is dependent or affected by elasticity, inversely by surface tension and airway resistance. Okay. So that means what? When the lungs is deflating, that is during expiration, the surface tension generated is more, is more. Okay, this is the take of it. Understood? Clear? Hope this is clear. This is a very conceptual thing. Okay, so during expiration, the compliance is more, the stretchability is more, and the lung is facing actually more pressure. Okay. Now, this is what is the implication from the hysteresis. Now, few examples, few clinical conditions that affect the static compliance. So, rather we can say, look, clinical condition that is evident from the static compliance. Now, for example, see, this is our normal graph, right? This is our normal graph. This is again the volume scale, and this is the pressure scale. So what did we study? The static compliance normal is like that. Now in some condition, the compliance may go down like this, and some condition, the the static compliance may go much higher. Okay. So conditions like emphysema, conditions like emphysema makes the compliance curve upper. This is the normal one, and condition where the where the stiffness or the tightness increases like that of a fibrosis, pulmonary fibrosis, the static compliance comes lower. So what actually happens during emphysema? In emphysema, the elastic fibers are damaged. So, since the elastic fibers are damaged, so after inspiration, the lungs cannot come back to the normal position because elastic fibers are damaged. Now, without elastic fiber, the lungs that has inflated cannot come back to its normal condition. So, here you see the compliance. The stretchability is normal, but it cannot come back to the normal position. So, here you see the emphysema, the curve has moved upward. Now, in case of fibrosis or the scarring of the lung tissue, in case of fibrosis, scarring of lungs occur. So since scarring of lungs occur, then the stretchability, that is the compliance, decrease. So since the compliance itself is decreasing, then what will happen? The curve, the static curve, it will not go up because since there is scarred tissue, even under pressure, the lungs cannot increase, cannot inflate. So the static compliance goes down. Okay, this is what it means. So just looking at the picture, it is like this, as I told you. Okay. Yeah. So as you can see here, in emphysema, this is a normal one. In emphysema, there is increase in the static condition. Now, other conditions like conditions like fail chest or sternotomy, incision that we make in the sternum while accessing the heart for any kind of operation, sternotomy increases the compliance and decreases elasticity. Other than emphysema, these are also the condition when these changes are seen. In fibrosis, this fibrosis like conditions like other conditions which will give the similar depression, the curve will move downward. The curve will move downward are pulmonary congestion, then pneumothorax, pulmonary fibrosis, one we have already seen, or there is like consolidation, like removal of the alveoli, consolidation, okay, or any kind of pulmonary tumor. In all these cases, what will happen? The compliance will decrease, okay, and elasticity will be normal. But since compliance is decreased, means the stretching of the lung is less, so it will come back also less because the stretching itself is less. So though the elasticity is normal, but the stretching is affected. The lung cannot inflate to its maximum capacity. So the elasticity being normal also does not help. The stretching is less. So the static compliance curve moves downward. And where there is loss of elasticity, the elastic fibers are lost. It also happens in people who are old. In them, the distension will be much more, but it cannot come back to its original position. It will stay distended only, and thus the static compliance curve will go up as we see in this graph. Okay, this is our clinical link. Next, we move on to surfactant. Many a times in the previous classes, we did mention about the surfactant. So, chemically, it is diphosphatidylcholine in composition. It's a phospholipid which is also known as the lecithin. Lecithin. And what did we study this lecithin? Where is it abundant? It is abundant in the inner leaf of the cell membrane. Like it is like abundant. It works more. It is like located in the lecithin, located in the inner leaf, but physiological for the purpose of physiological function through the lipase carrier protein, it is moved to the external leaf of the cell membrane, which we have studied in the first chapter itself. So, it is dipalmethyl phosphatidylcholine or lecithin, which is a lipoprotein, which cell synthesizes that. It is the alveolar type 2 cells, which is also known as the granular pneumocytes, because they have a granules in the pneumocyte cell, and it is in the granule that the surfactant is stored. So alveolar type 2 cells secretes lecithin. So right after the secretion or synthesis, what actually happens after synthesis of this surfactant? It is stored in the lamellar body. It is stored in the lamellar bodies, and the lamellar bodies, they form that tubular myelin kind of a structure, and then later it is secreted later during expiration. Now, after expiration, it's not that the amount of the lecithin surfactant that is secreted or released, all of it is used. Now, excess surfactant is removed by the granulocyte macrophage colony stimulating factor. Rather, we can tell it is removed by the macrophage cells. Okay, now What does it mainly consist of? The composition of surfactant is lipids and protein. Lipids and protein. So in lipids, it has got lecithin. Okay, this is the main one. It has got lecithin. And in protein, it has got surfactant protein A, B, C and D. Now out of this A, B, C and D, it is the surfactant protein B that act as surfactant. Okay, whereas the protein surfactant A and D, the protein A and D have defense mechanism. Now, the surfactant, it is not equally available in the antenatal during the pregnancy, in the antenatal period, in the fetus equally. So, the weeks of gestation, this concept is very important for you to connect to the pediatrics. So, as per the weeks of gestation, what happens? This surfactant on the 24 weeks during pregnancy, surfactant is synthesized. Okay. Now, as soon as it is synthesized, the composition is not proper. So, it is only by the 32 weeks that the lecithin increases in the surfactant and sphingomyelin and sphingomyelin decreases. Okay. And it is by the 34 weeks that matured surfactant is released. Now, what is the main function of the surfactant? Function of surfactant. Now, the function of surfactant, this is to reduce surface tension. Okay. Now, what is surface tension? So, surface tension, whenever there is an orifice. Orifice means contact. Okay. Between water to water or air to water, surface tension develops. This is like the general thing. So, in the lungs, so in the lungs, what is happening in the lungs? There is gaseous exchange happening in the alveoli, the respiratory membrane structure we will study in the next class. So, there is gaseous exchange that is happening at the level of the alveoli, and alveoli is supplied by the capillaries. So, capillary is carrying the blood, it is giving the blood flow, and through the alveoli, through that respiratory membrane structure, which are made from some layer of the capillary and some layer of the alveoli. So, when exchange of gases is happening, means from the atmosphere, we are breathing in air. That air is going to the lungs, and from the lungs, it is sitting onto the blood by the process of diffusion, right? That means air is getting dissolved in the blood and is also binding onto the hemoglobin of the blood. And blood is what? Blood is a new liquid substance. Blood is a liquid substance and air is a gaseous substance. So in the lungs, the air and water orifice, that is the air that is coming in, getting exchanged, and it is binding within or with the blood, components of blood. So that is again a contact between the air and the water. So within the lungs, the air and the water orifice develops tension, which we call as the surface tension. So now what is seen actually, according to the Laplace's law, according to the Laplace's law, okay, tension generated, okay, tension generated has an inverse relation, to the radius, okay. In case of a spherical substance, that is the alveoli is a spherical substance, this Laplace's law applies to the cylinder substance also, that is the blood vessels, and to the alveoli also, which is spherical in structure. Now, especially if it is spherical in structure, the tension generated under any pressure is 2 times more. So, here, say this is, if we are drawing it, okay, say this is one alveoli, normal alveoli, okay, this is alveoli. So, during inspiration, what will happen? There is, we know there will be expansion in the diameter of the alveoli, right? The alveoli diameter increases, right? During inspiration. So, what is the tension generated? See, tension generated is inverse to the radius. Diameter increased means what? Tension generated will be more or less. So, tension generated will be what? More or less. Tension will be less. Tension generated will be less. Why? Because tension generated is inversely proportional to the radius. During inspiration, what is happening? The radius is increasing. So, if the radius is increasing, the tension generated will be less. But again, during expiration, what is happening in expiration? There is reduction in the diameter of the alveoli. So, diameter decreases. So, if diameter decreases means radius is also decreased. Radius is decreased means tension will be more. Tension will be more. Tension will increase. And what tension we are talking here about? Here, this is the surface tension. Now, especially after birth, the first cry of the baby is because of the severe contraction of the inspiratory muscle and the lung influx. More than that, the force of expiration on the alveoli, the tension, this is for you to know and remember, right? That again we will discuss in the reproductive system and the adaptational change of a child right after birth. So for now, just remember during expiration, the first expiration after the child is born, which of course nobody remembers, that one has the highest surface tension. I repeat, The first cry is due to the inflation of the lungs due to contraction of the respiratory muscle, inspiratory muscle specifically. Similarly, after inspiration, when expiration happens, the surface tension generated on the alveoli, that is maximum, that is more than the surface tension that is generated in the lungs for rest of the life. Okay, so first expiration has the highest or the biggest surface tension generated. So that force is so strong, it has the capacity to collapse the lung. Now, this surface tension is reduced by the surfactant. How? How it is reduced? What does the surfactant do? Surfactant, when there is decrease in the diameter of the alveoli, surfactant removes the water molecules from the alveoli surface back to the capillaries. So when the water molecule are less, because nothing can remove the air until and unless expiration happens. So only the water molecule can be removed because it is in the circulation. So surfactant, it will, that is DPCC, so it will act on the water molecule that is present in the lungs when it is in deflated condition during expiration, and it will clean. It will move the water molecule from the surface of the alveoli back into the capillary. This is the function of the surfactant. Now, here, if there is mutation in the gene making surfactant, means signaling surfactant, like SFTPB, SFTBC, this is the name of the gene, then resultant is surfactant is not formed, resulting in respiratory distress syndrome, or RDS, and this can result in death of the infant. Okay, this is one of the reason. Now, apart from that, there are some other factors also that may result in this respiratory distress syndrome. So, other conditions affecting the surfactant, condition affecting the surfactant, other condition affecting the surfactant. What are they? Means which will decrease the surfactant, like cigarette smoking, inhalation of pure oxygen. Okay, it may cause like atelectasis, then occlusion in the bronchus, or occlusion in the pulmonary artery, cutting of vagus, if both the vagus are cut, or C-section. Cesarean section sometimes may lead to respiratory distress syndrome, which is also called as a hyaline membrane syndrome. Okay, resulting in the atelectasis. On this condition, these may result in atelectasis causing respiratory distress syndrome. Okay, there are certain factors which will increase the production of surfactant and decrease the production of surfactant. So, factors that increase surfactant production. What are they? Like thyroid hormones, thyrotropins, thyrotropins, CAMP, secondary messenger, epidermal growth factors. These are some example these are the substances which will increase the surfactant production. Similarly, there are factors that decreases surfactant like insulin, tumor necrotic factor, transforming growth factor. These are the some condition factors that will decrease the surfactant production. Now, there are certain ways to measure the surfactant to detect if the surfactant in a neonate or in the fetus to be born is mature enough or the fetus is having the possibility to have atelectasis. So the possibility for a neonate or an infant to have this respiratory distress syndrome is related only to the surfactant, right? In this condition of the lungs. So there are certain ways to measure whether the surfactant in the fetal lung is growing or is synthesized properly or not. So methods to measure lung surfactant. First is the first is the Lemon's bubble test. So here actually what happens, 96% of ethanol is mixed with amniotic fluid, and if bubbles are more, then it means lung maturation. This is one way. Another way is to study the phosphatidylate content. So, if phospho, if the Phosphatidylcholine is 55 ng per ml of surfactant, then it is mature. Means the lung is secreting and synthesizing mature surfactant, in which case the fetus after birth will not run the risk of having atelectasis. Another is the laminar count, like counting the laminar body. So, a count of 55,000 per microliter of the surfactant sample indicates lung maturity. And these tests are mainly done to avoid the risk of atelectasis. So, this is what are the steps of the surfactant. Now that we have understood the compliance, we have understood the surfactant, we move on to understanding a very physiologically important concept, which is the concept of dead space. Now, before going into the dead space, let us remember one diagram that we have studied in the last class. Okay. So, in the previous respiratory class, we have studied about the Vogel's classification and the 23 generations. So, the dead space, this is actually of two type. Okay. Dead space means anatomic dead space and physiologic dead space. Now, anatomic dead space, it means the regions in the respiratory structure where only passage of gas or passage of air takes place. So, basically, it is referring from the first generation to the 16th generation. That is the structure of the conducting zone. Structure of the conducting zone. This is anatomic dead space. Okay. Now, apart from this too, before coming into the physiologic dead space, we have to know about alveolar dead space. Now, alveolar dead space, this is actually the space, or this is actually the air that is present in the alveoli, like in the alveolar ducts and alveoli mainly, which is air that is not participating in respiration. Means it is the space or air in alveoli that is present in the alveoli. Alveoli means it is present in the respiratory zone, right? Not in the conducting zone. It is present in the respiratory zone but is not participating in gaseous exchange. Okay, it is not participating in gaseous exchange. A very recent finding says that this physiologic dead space is equivalent to the alveolar dead space. In some books, you also find that physiologic dead space is equal to anatomic dead space plus alveolar dead space. So there is a little bit of conceptual argument in it. Okay, some say physiologic dead space is equivalent to the alveolar dead space, means they both mean the same. Some say that physiologic dead space actually combines both the anatomic dead space and the alveolar dead space. Okay, coming to the values, this anatomic dead space as it is in the structure that is present in the conducting zone, this anatomic this anatomic dead space is actually how it is, like 2 ml per kg of weight. Okay, 2 ml per kg of weight. So which is roughly like 150 ml. It comes to a value of 150 for standard. Like assuming the person is an adult, healthy, 70 kg of weight. So it is like 154 ml, which is like thought to be like 150 ml. Okay, this is an anatomic dead space. So anatomic dead space is in healthy person, in healthy person, the anatomic dead space is equal to the physiologic dead space. But now there are certain conditions which increases this anatomical dead space, this alveolar dead space. So conditions that increases anatomic dead space. What are the conditions that increases the anatomic dead space? The conditions are like neck extension, upright position. If a person is sitting like or standing erect or upright, or the neck is extended, then the anatomic dead space increases because the length of this neck area in the upright position or in extended position, it increases. Jaw protrusion. So if the jaw is protruded, then the length, because these are the structure that comes in the conducting zone, so automatically any structure, if the structure's length is increased, which is in the conducting zone, and conducting zone is the zone where no exchange of gas takes place, so obviously the anatomic dead space will increase. Other conditions are like anticholinergic drugs. So drugs that are anticholinergic means basically they are blocking the vagus nerve activity. Okay. They will also vagus nerve activity is like blocked. Then what will happen? It will cause like hyperventilation, increase in the respiration, right? All these things will also increase the anatomic dead space. Okay. Then general anesthesia. Then emphysema. Emphysema is a condition when the lung cannot come back to its original position. If the lung is not coming back to the original position, not enough volume of air is going out. So there is accumulation of air which will add to the anatomic dead space. These are the conditions in which the anatomic dead space increases. The conditions in which the alveolar dead space increases. That means either there is gas in the alveoli but exchange is not taking place, or there is enough gas but not enough blood. Okay, so conditions in which alveolar dead space increase. Now, what are the conditions in which alveolar dead space increases? Like non-perfusion of the supraclavicular region of lungs. So, the lung is a very huge structure. So, the tip of the lung, which is the apex of the lung, not the base, it is like above the clavicle. It is like supraclavicle. Now, when a person is standing, especially when the person is standing, the pull of gravitational force is more towards the down. The legs are touching the feet. So, in this condition, the blood circulation is very less to the supraclavicular portion of the lung. I repeat, during standing position or sitting position, due to the force of gravity, pull of gravity, the blood supply to the supraclavicular region of the lung is less. So, this causes accumulation of air that is not receiving enough blood flow. This is one condition. Then another condition is that non-perfusion of the alveoli. So if there is any kind of hypotension, like in pulmonary hypotension, due to any reason there has been loss of blood, may it be some trauma, may it be some accident, may it be anything, there is like total drop in the blood volume, or there is some obstruction in the pulmonary arteries, pulmonary blood vessels, okay, or some obstruction in the capillary, as a result of which not adequate volume of blood is coming to the lungs. So there is pulmonary hypotension. The amount of the blood that should come and perfuse the lungs are less. So in this condition also, there will be less blood flow to the alveoli, even to the lower alveoli, which is close to the gravity, even to the lower alveoli, which is close to the gravity. And pulmonary embolism. Embolism means when a part of the clot breaks out and it starts circulating in the blood circulation. So if such kind of small clots are there in the pulmonary circulation, then also there will be not adequate blood supply. So in this condition, there is like defect. In this above two condition, what did we see? Here we saw there is enough air, but the blood flow or the blood supply is less. Now coming to the opposite condition, like less ventilation to the lungs. So here what happens? If there are conditions, if there are conditions like in alveolar septa. Okay, like in alveolar septa. Here what happens? Because of the alveolar septa or damage to the alveoli, any kind of damage to the alveoli, what will happen? There is enough blood flow. There is no problem with the perfusion, but there is not enough air coming in from the atmosphere to the lungs because the alveoli are having a septa or the alveoli are damaged. In this condition also, there will be more alveolar dead space. Means there is like blood, but there is not enough air. So dead space is there where there are capacity for exchange of gases, but exchange of gases is not happening. Okay, these are the condition in which the alveolar dead space is. Okay, now this dead space, how is this dead space measured? Measurement of dead space. So we'll understand that with the graph. So here the person is made to here the person is made to inspire a known quantity of nitrogen. The person is made to inspire known quantity of nitrogen, and the expired nitrogen content is measured by a nitrogen meter. So when the person first inspire nitrogen and he is expiring, the quantity of the nitrogen that we measure, it is represented as a graph like that. First, like on the x-axis scale, we have the lung volume, and on the y-axis, it is the nitrogen percentage. So first, what happens in the first volume, that is like the first stage when the person actually starts expiring, that is the stage 1. There is hardly in stage 1, in the stage 1, no nitrogen is detected. Why no nitrogen is detected? Because here first the expired air contains of the oxygen, from the conducting zone. Okay, so one thing is it is oxygen. So when the person is expiring in the stage 1, the oxygen that is filled in the conducting zone comes out and no nitrogen is detected, because after inspiring the nitrogen has been pushed to the lower alveoli. In the stage 2, the nitrogen starts appearing and there is a sharp peak. As you can see in the graph, there is a sharp rise in the content of the nitrogen. Now, this content is of the nitrogen that is lying just below the oxygen column. From the conducting zone, the oxygen has come out. And why we chose to measure nitrogen? Because unlike oxygen, nitrogen does not react or does not undergo any exchange of gases. So whatever nitrogen is there, it will come out. Whatever nitrogen gets into the inspired air will come out automatically in the same quantity. At least 99.9% of the nitrogen comes out intact. So it is easier for us to measure the dead space. So in the second stage, when the nitrogen starts coming after the oxygen has come out, so we see a sharp increase or rise in the nitrogen content, which we have plotted in the y-axis. Now, after that, for certain time, there is a plateau, like a linear, almost a linear plateau, meaning what? Here there is no increase in the nitrogen content, meaning what? The alveoli that is giving out the nitrogen, it is coming not only from the upper alveoli, it is coming from the lower alveoli. Now, the end of this plateau signifies closing volume. So, here in the stage 2 and 3, if we write it, stage 2, nitrogen content increases as nitrogen comes out of the upper alveoli. Okay. In stage 3, almost all nitrogen comes out of the lower alveoli. Now, when this 3 ends, it also signifies the closing volume. Now, closing volume, it is the critical volume in the alveoli when the lower alveoli, dependent alveoli means the lower alveoli that is present and which is having the strongest pull of gravitational force, because alveoli which is in the lower part of the lungs, they are having the strongest pull of gravitational force, right? So, the end of this stage 3, it signifies that the maximum quantity of nitrogen means not only nitrogen, the maximum quantity of gas, but we are talking about nitrogen because it is easy to measure the content of nitrogen and as it is an inert gas. So, the maximum content of nitrogen is coming out of the alveoli and the volume of the air or the gas present in the lower alveoli is so less that they are closing down. They are like kind of collapsing. Okay, they are collapsing. Nothing more is there to come out. The alveoli are now collapsing. The last increase, the last spike that you see here is like mainly from that is the stage 4. The stage 4. So here the nitrogen rushes out of the remaining upper alveoli. Upper alveoli means like upper part of the alveoli. Okay, upper part of the alveoli. Whatever nitrogen is present now, they start coming out. Those alveoli which are not dependent alveoli means they are on the upper part of the lungs which has got the least or the weakest force of attraction. I repeat again, to calculate the dead space, we use the nitrometer. What is nitrometer? The person is made to exhale and the nitrogen content is measured in it. So what we do, we first make the person inspire a known quantity of the oxygen. Now this oxygen that we are making him to inspire. So when we are inspiring air, something new, that one will first go to the conducting zone. After the previous expiration, it is not that all the air in the lungs have gone out. So, the air in the lungs that is present before I expire the oxygen has oxygen, carbon dioxide and nitrogen. Now, I can't measure the oxygen and carbon dioxide because the quantity will be wrong, because oxygen and carbon dioxide undergoes gaseous exchange. So, it will give me false understanding of the dead space. So, what I can calculate, I can calculate the nitrogen. So after making a person inspire a known concentration of oxygen, we make the person to expire maximally. And we measure the nitrogen from the nitrometer. So the thing is that when the person is expiring, the first portion we see there is no nitrogen and there is no change in the graph also. The graph is not climbing up. This one is just like the air that has come out and it has got no nitrogen. Why no nitrogen? It is a nitrogen meter, right? So it will not detect the concentration of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Why it will not? Because the inspired oxygen goes and fills the conducting zone. So when I'm breathing out, automatically the air from the conducting zone will come out first and then from the other. So first, the air from the conducting zone comes out, which is pure oxygen and has no nitrogen, because a person is made to inspire pure oxygen, right? So that pure oxygen is in the conducting zone, then it goes below the conducting zone. So that column which comes out is the pure oxygen. So in stage 1, we don't get any nitrogen. Now, when the person is made to continue expiration forcefully by squeezing, so squeezing the expiratory muscle, abdomen and all, then what we see in the second stage, there is a steady climb in the nitrogen percentage. That means nitrogen has started coming out from the respiratory zone. So nitrogen, when it starts coming out from the respiratory zone, first is comes from the upper alveoli. Upper alveoli means the dependent alveoli. The upper alveoli here, it means the alveoli in the upper region of the dependent area. Dependent area means the area on which the gravitational force of maximum pull. So first the upper alveoli of the dependent area, then the lower alveoli of the dependent area. Okay. So from here, if this is the if this is the lung, okay, the this area is dependent area most. Okay, this is intermediate, this one, and the topmost is non-dependent area. So first from the dependent area, the upper region, the nitrogen is coming out, then it keeps on getting expired and a label, a plateau is maintained, means a constant concentration of nitrogen comes out. So from the upper alveoli, then from the lower alveoli of the dependent area, means which has the maximum pull of the gravity. Now, after that, when all the expiration is continued, a time comes that very little air or very little volume of gas is present in the dependent area. So, those alveoli, due to very less concentration, very less quantity of the air, starts collapsing, starts closing down. So, the volume at which this alveoli starts closing down or collapsing is called as the closing volume. Closing volume. Now, as you can see this line, so closing volume is always lesser than, like before the residual volume. The lungs have adapted in such a way that the volume is lesser than the residual volume. Now, further, if like lots of pressure is exerted and given, then what happens is air from the upper alveoli, like from the region which is not dependent, like from this non-dependent area, means where the pull of gravity is not more. So air from those part of the alveoli also comes out and it brings out the residual volume air also in form of the nitrogen. So all those nitrogen content again increases, because even below the after the closing volume, whatever is there in the residual volume which is not supposed to come out is also coming out. That's why the nitrogen content increases. So by this is how the normal curve looks like. So when a person is subjected to this experiment, comparing his or her condition with this normal graph, that's how we see the graph and study the dead space. Okay, so this is about how to measure the dead space. So this was our respiratory to regular class, like the class in detail. Okay, next we will continue with the respiratory system, talking about the lung capacity and volume in our next class, and the implied and the clinical aspect of the functional residual capacity and other functions of the lungs also. Okay. So see you all in the next class.